Every conversation you have is a choice, shift or drift. You can either steer the conversation towards a meaningful outcome or let it drift into the abyss of mediocrity. Leaders choose to shift. It's a skill that can be learned and practiced. Listen now to learn how. Welcome to today's Beyond the Boardroom podcast, where Joe and I will be talking to you about the importance of great conversations.
I'm so excited about this one.
Yeah.
Because I think people, leaders, I've been a leader myself.
You're still a leader.
I'm still a leader. But I've been a leader of a big team. And the importance of creating good connections, strong communication. It's just so important, isn't it? If you want to connect your people to your purpose, it has to happen through good connections, good communication.
Yeah.
So critical for every leader. And we talk a lot about emotional intelligence, how important that is for a leader, making good decisions, how important that is for a leader. But the ability to be able to connect with people, especially across, remote working, global organisations, different time zones, different cultural preferences. It's big.
Yeah, it's almost, it sounds simple, doesn't it? But it's almost one of the singular most important things. Like every organisation is grown on one conversation at a time.
I love
or
that.
not, and that's how important it is. And actually, if we can remove conflict from organisations, the speed at which it can move is phenomenal. And I think conflict only comes when people don't really understand. Or they don't try to understand. And so even most conflict with a good conversation and an understanding of each other and where you're coming from can lead to, some kind of compromise maybe, or not. But at least there is a kind of a better understanding.
Everything's sort of out on the table, isn't it? Because healthy conflict is good. People are good at it, right? They debate a conversation, come out with a much better answer. The combination of your ideas and thoughts together can create something much greater than you might have created. So what's critical for that is psychological safety. With that, you can have much more honest conversations. People are prepared to say what they think. You can have that debate. The challenge is when you don't have that and then people are staying quiet, you're missing out on their full potential and their ideas. It's so critical to be able to do that.
And you can only, what comes first? Psychological safety or great conversations and trust. And I think you can probably only get to psychological safety. And I know people think differently, but for me, you can only get to psychological safety when you have trust. And that comes from having great conversations. The amount of teams that we work with where we will run a session just getting to know each other, and we definitely have more in common than we have apart. And if you're working as part of a team, you are on the same team. So even when you've got conflict, your job is to find the right answer in service of whatever you're trying to achieve on behalf of whoever you're trying to achieve that for. And so I find it phenomenal the number of times we help teams just truly understand about each other, and therefore understand why you might be thinking the way that you think, or what values that you hold that mean something is so important to you, and to be respectful. And I think that's a really important word actually in business, to be respectful of those things around each other, and yet still have the healthy debate and do the right thing on behalf of the business.
I think there's something really interesting there about them understanding each other's triggers, because I see a lot of emotion in teams. And I don't necessarily mean crying, but actually people losing their temper, people actually withdrawing and not saying anything because they can't get past the anger or the emotion. So actually understanding a bit more about each other. And I think when you start to then bring that out into a much more organisational sense, there's something there about understanding your people, what is going to connect them to your purpose. How can you do that? You know, if you've only got 10 or 12 people, relatively straightforward, right? You probably still go to the pub after work on a Friday, or, you know, there's certainly a lunchtime where you can maybe bring everyone together. It's simple. But actually you start to get much bigger than that, and that kind of web of communication becomes much more complex.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting because when you talk about that, I think about if we don't communicate well, we can often end up with unintended resistance. And there's only 3 reasons people resist change or resist anything. Is I don't understand it.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Yeah.
Or I don't trust it and you.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the only 3.
Yeah.
And if you think about each of those 3, the only way to come back from that is a great conversation.
Yeah, it is.
Let me help you understand.
Yeah.
What is it you don't know?
Yeah.
Let me let me help you with what you don't trust.
Yeah.
Or what you don't like. What is it you don't like about it?
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing, isn't it? Conversation is two-way. The hearing, certainly as a leader, it's not always just about talking to and at.
No.
In fact, it shouldn't be that at all. It should be seeking to understand and help your organisation move, because that's what we're really about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Helping your organisation move.
Yeah.
And they need to know in what direction.
Yeah.
And how we communicate in so many channels as well. I think when you're saying how big an organisation becomes, we have Slack, we have Teams, we have SharePoint, we have an intranet, we have
email, we have phone calls. Yeah.
How do we simplify that so that they are truly powerful, helpful?
Well, I suppose if you use that kind of thread about hearing, and I think actually using the word hearing rather than listening is so important. Your use of language there. Well, there's another thing to think about is use of language, but hearing what people are saying. Don't just do a listening session if you're not actually listening, or you're going to take every comment people have got to say and talk to them about why that's okay. Because you're not there to influence them, you're there to hear. Really hear what people are saying. You could start there, couldn't you, almost? Get people in a room that work for your organisation and really hear how they want to be communicated to. What is going to create a connection for them? What's important to them? What makes them tick? What are their values? Understanding that, and as I say, with 12 people, pretty straightforward. But it's still possible in much bigger arenas.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think, those 12, you tend to know each other really well, or know each other's families really well and different things. But that starts to get, you move from kind of being that family to that tribe, to that village, to that, it does get much bigger. And that's why there's such an importance on some of the things you've talked about, like what are the organisational values and how do they connect to my personal values? And there's also something about, I love, what's that programme where the boss visits the back to the floor? And really seeks to understand from the individual's perspective. And not to try and answer from his or her own. And that understanding really unlocks so much, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. I think we might have spoken about it before, but one of the most powerful things I've done with an organisation is that back to the floor piece. Actually doing a shift with somebody doing their job and experiencing it and hearing it from them. And I think, when we think about communication, depending how big the organisation is, so much gets lost in translation, doesn't it? So your kind of ethos of your messaging is normally with good intent. You're normally intending to land your message, but there's a lot of layers to get through. There's other barriers that get in the way. Do everyone work the same hours? Are you dealing with a global context, so actually not everybody is in work in their global space at the same time? And what does that mean to your kind of program of communication? Because that for me there's a number of things around communication, isn't there? There's what do I want to say? What's my intent?
Yes.
What language am I going to use and will people understand it?
Yeah.
What channel am I going to use?
Yeah.
Slack,
Yeah.
email, phone call, all hands.
Yeah.
Yes, number of different things to think about.
And I think there's a couple of bits, isn't there? So we know for something to really land, you need to hear it at least 7 times.
Yeah.
And probably not the same way 7 times.
No.
And then I think the bit we might miss in comms is ensuring understanding. So kind of that back brief, if you like.
Oh, yeah, nice.
So I love this tool called MAD, which is what's my message, who's the audience, what's the method of delivery.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I would add you at the end, so mad you. It doesn't make sense anymore. But and how do I ensure understanding?
Yeah.
Or you could have made, couldn't you? Ensure understanding.
Yeah.
So message, audience, delivery method, and ensuring understanding.
And right here live on a podcast.
Absolutely. How do I make my comms
redesigning a tool.
Absolutely.
But yeah, you're absolutely right, because quite often it's a bit of a broadcast, isn't it? Oh, we've got a message, out it comes as an email from the CEO's office, sort of thing. We've both worked in organisations like that. And trying to get organisations to shift a bit of that. How do you make that communication much more personal?
Yeah.
So you're really talking to every individual.
Yeah.
As much as you possibly can.
Yeah, and we've all been on town halls, haven't we, where we do the broadcast, as you describe, and then we ask if there are any questions. And it is tumbleweed.
And why is that?
Because we haven't really created the safe enough environment for people to ask questions.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is it isn't because they don't have any.
No.
It's because they don't feel safe enough to ask them, which means you lose the most beautiful opportunity to have people tell you what they're really thinking, to ask the difficult questions, and then allay everybody's fears, especially if it's something quite difficult that you're sharing.
Yeah.
Because when you communicate to us as humans, the first thing we're thinking is, what does this mean for me?
Yeah.
What does it mean for me? What's in it for me?
Yeah.
I may well have just heard that broadcast and now I'm panicking.
Yeah.
And if I'm panicking, I'm going to come off that town hall and I'm going to talk to us, because we're emotional beings, or some of us are emotional beings. I'm likely to go around and ask at 5 people what this actually means and what's it mean, and ruffle feathers potentially.
Yeah.
Versus leaning in and having clear two-way comms where people feel, it's comfortable comms, isn't it? Where people feel comfortable to ask the question that's really on their mind, and for leaders to be comfortable enough to answer those, and it may be that, you think ahead before you go into communication. It's one of the things we talk with our clients about, is a bit of a stakeholder analysis. Who's important? Who's influential? What do you want them going away thinking? Do you want to do any prep with any of those before you go into the town hall themselves? But also, let's play chess a bit here. What questions are you going to be asked? I quite often talk about what questions don't you want to be asked?
Yeah.
And then we
what
list
would
them.
be the answer?
And then we answer them.
Yeah.
I
think it also kind of triggers that piece for leaders about thinking they always have to have the answer.
Yes.
And actually, there's something quite powerful in going, that's a really good question. I don't have the answer right now, but I'm going to go away and find that out. Always double back. Always make sure you close the loop. Otherwise, you'll lose the impact of being able to say, I didn't know the answer, but I did then go and find out. That humble. I didn't think about that from your perspective.
Yes.
That's a learning. Lean in, because for leaders, that's a bit uncomfortable, isn't it?
It gets so much kudos though. And honestly, don't do it all the time, but leaders who are able to say, actually, I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
Or leaders that say, actually, that's a really good idea. What do you think?
Yeah, how could we build on that?
How can we build on that?
Yeah.
What ideas? Or I'm going to immediately open up an idea form for you all. Like anyone, I don't want to take the time away, because that's the other thing. We're all precious, and I don't want to take the time away and have 150 people talking about it on a call right now. But I'm going to set up a form as soon as we get off, and it'd be great for you guys to give me your ideas, and I'll come and talk to a few of you that can explore this further with me.
Yeah. I think there's something else, isn't there, about one of the tactics I've used on town hall or that type of thing has been, especially where it's virtual, break them into smaller groups.
Yes.
Get different members of the leadership team to host smaller groups, because I found that in smaller groups people are feeling safer.
Agreed.
More prepared to say something.
Yeah.
Whereas, in that wider group, that tumbleweed at the end.
Yeah.
And so many leaders come off those and say, well, they didn't have any questions. It must all be all right.
It's all fine.
Like, no.
They're not spending the next hour gossiping about what they just said
to each other. Yeah, exactly that.
I think the other thing I like about the smaller groups that you suggest is that they have a little bit of space to frame the question in a way that's helpful. Because I think that's another fear of leaders, and it definitely happens, is when you have the rebel in the room. And you should embrace the rebel in the room, right?
Absolutely.
But the rebel in the room can deliver a question and everyone goes,
so glad they asked the question.
Let's watch them answer that.
Yeah.
Whereas actually that doesn't, in my experience, when you've broken them out into small groups, they tend to coach each other to ask that same question, but in a way that isn't antagonistic or too triggering for the person they're going to ask it to.
Yeah.
It's a great idea.
Also, I think giving people time, because people do sometimes need a bit of time to process.
Yeah.
So depending on what your communication is about, it might be that people just need a bit of time and then might want to ask some questions. So it might be that you do whatever your announcement is, but then have a placeholder to say, we're going to come back together in 2 days.
Yeah, lovely.
3 days.
Yeah.
And then we'll answer any questions you've got then.
Yeah.
But of course, you're absolutely right. The time that's then lost, depending what you're talking about. Of course, it could be just, important news about the direction of travel of the organisation, which there's nothing negative about, but still, my experience, certainly I think I'm a good communicator, but I'd still find myself with pockets of my team that might say, I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah.
And how did that happen?
Yeah, I think there's that. I think there is the two watch outs for us as senior leaders in a business. And I used to use my mum as a litmus test for this. The first one is we've been talking about something for quite a long time. By the time it lands with the organisation, even if it's simple business results, we will have looked at them before. We will have produced the deck for the team. And we will have asked lots of questions, or we'll have had our healthy debate and conflict, and we will have made decisions, and then we go and tell the organisation. They don't know the background to why we've made some of the decisions that we've made. And I think we forget to share the why too often. And it's, this is what we're doing. And then that's the confusion, is why did you choose that versus other options? But, where actually you've probably thought through a number of options and ultimately you chose this one. I think the other one is we get really excited about numbers and data. And it doesn't always translate to the organisation. And then there's potentially some fear of asking about what that means. And so how do we simplify our message so that anybody can listen? My mum used to say to me, we've had the Americans over again today. They're talking about a whole load of numbers on this really boring presentation that nobody understands or cares about.
Yeah.
Which is a hard thing to hear, isn't it? As an exec, you're like, what, you don't care about the numbers? And that's not what any of them really meant.
No.
What they really meant is
we don't necessarily understand.
We don't really understand, and it wasn't told in a compelling story. Like there's data and graphs and etc. Versus kind of making it relatable and energizing.
Yeah.
And I do think storytelling is a critical skill if you are going to create followership in an organisation.
I agree. So ditch the deck.
Ditch the deck. Yeah. Think about Steve Jobs and some of his presentations.
Yeah.
There weren't 150 words on a slide. There'd have been one picture.
Yeah.
And he could tell a story so that you felt you understood some quite complex things at times.
Yeah.
Very engaging. Spent a huge amount of time practicing that, of course. But
I don't think there's enough of that now. No. I don't see as much of that.
No.
For a town hall, I don't see enough. Maybe is it enough? I don't know. I don't see much of practicing those really good communication.
No.
I think because people rely on a deck.
Yeah.
They rely on, I'm just going to bring the deck to life.
Yeah.
But the most wonderful storytellers just weave a much broader story into
Yeah.
what they want to talk about.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know, pulling on personal experience.
Absolutely.
Because that connects humans, doesn't
Yes.
it? Builds, I don't know, your connection with that person.
Yeah.
It builds, wow, he's actually, or she, they're actual human beings.
Yeah.
With their own personal experiences.
Yeah.
You didn't just arrive here as ready-made senior people.
Absolutely.
And exactly as the rest of the population of the organisation, everyone's coming to work to do their very best.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're also doing a very difficult job to
Yeah.
navigate potentially challenging situations.
Absolutely. But we're made for stories. Like
Yeah,
we
of
are
course we
made
are.
for stories. We are engaged by stories.
Yeah.
We talk about in some of our leadership development program, we talk about the elephant and rider concept,
Yeah,
don't
we
we?
do, yeah.
So many businesses, and I remember this lovely conference I was at supporting a number of leaders to learn how to storytell. And we did a great job of talking about, so the elephant and the rider. So the rider is the logic part. So the rider is the smaller of the two, actually, which the numbers speak to, the process speaks to. The analogy is that, you know, you've got the rider and you may have convinced the rider, so the head.
Yeah.
But the elephant, the heart, the emotion is the bigger part. And
Yeah.
the rider cannot make that elephant move
No.
if it is not emotionally
Connected
and inclined to move.
Yeah, beautiful.
And I remember doing this wonderful session, and the German team, so we had different countries across the region, and the German team were like, oh, we need to put emotion into, and they went back to their organisation and they ditched the numbers, they ditched the deck.
Yeah.
And they talked with energy, enthusiasm, engagement, and the change in culture of their organisation
That's amazing.
was
isn't it?
beautiful.
Yeah.
Not only the performance, but the followership that they created.
Yeah.
Not because we have to do it and the numbers tell us, but because we want to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite special.
It always reminds me of that How to Start a Movement video on YouTube where the guy gets up and starts dancing. And to start with, he must feel so out there, right?
Quite exposed, right?
Really exposed. He's got up, started a dance. People are nudging and, oh, well, what's he doing? And then before you know it, someone comes and dances with him, and someone else does, and so on and so forth. And I think that's it. It's finding that way to be able to create that followership.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that has to come with creating real human connection.
Absolutely. And doing it with intentionality. I mean, we always think, you know, you have to have over 50% of the organisation with you to create followership. And that's not necessarily true. You know, some of the stats suggest it's much lower. I think I've read kind of 17% somewhere.
Yeah.
But certainly if you take that video, it just needed a second person.
It did.
And when the second person was brave enough to get up, the rest started to get up. And then actually they came at quite some speed.
Yeah,
so,
quite quick.
So a couple of early adopters.
Yeah.
And you can really start a movement.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think it's so interesting, isn't it? Because in that scenario, it's not like he's saying to somebody, come and join me or anything.
No.
Whereas actually in an organisation, you can do a bit of that, can't you?
Yeah.
Reach out, create a network, reach out.
Yeah.
Something that comes up a lot for me when I'm working with organisations is this piece around understanding what each other does and how the organisation really works.
Yes.
So we produce a thing, whatever that thing is, we deliver a service, whatever that service is, and for different parts of the business to really understand,
Yes.
well, what do you do?
Yes.
And on your path to delivery for the
Yes.
customer, so put the customer right at the heart.
Yep.
What is it your department does that delivers for customers?
Yeah.
And as a people team leader, I've used that a lot to continue the connection between what we do as a not front-facing part of a business, an enabler, if you like, is to continually talk about what we do and how that leads back to delivering for customers at all times.
Yeah, and quite a lot of our work is dealing with that, isn't it, actually? Because sometimes you've got individual teams do a great job of communicating, connecting, team building, working together. We see a lot of organisations where the loss or the breakdown of something process is the handover. So the baton from one team to the next team.
Yeah.
And certainly in matrix organisations or those that are scaling, you know, if we think about some of the engineering teams where actually they've started to have to work in different tech stacks, and how do we make sure the customer, so if you take the customer again, how does the customer experience feel seamless?
Yeah.
You know, the important bit is, you know, how does this pillar or this team or this, you know, specialism talk to this specialism, so that at the end of all these changeovers, if you like, or the passing of the baton, we do our very best on behalf of each other and our you know, our customers. So that's a lot of our work is actually interconnecting.
It is.
The teams.
I like the relay race analogy for that.
Yes.
It's obviously the baton.
Yes.
And making sure that baton's been handed over well.
Yeah.
And as seamlessly and frictionless as possible.
Yeah.
Think about how much time is wasted in those friction points.
Well, we see it all the time, don't we? So the commercial team, the sales team with the production team, if you like, or any organisation where, I mean, you know, how often have we heard, well, the sales team have gone and sold the dream, but they don't understand the reality of production and vice versa. And actually, again, it comes down to great conversations. When you get those two groups in a room and they seek to understand each other and then, as you beautifully put, go, right, let's put the customer in the room, which we often do. There's a chair here, it represents the customer. We're on the same team trying to serve that customer. What is it we need to do? And there's a bit of a coaching philosophy as well, but what is it we can do on behalf of the customer that is going to make things better? Okay, what is it we can do for each other on behalf of each other that's going to make things better? And just have those real listening conversations.
Yeah, so important, isn't it? Back to listening and hearing being such an important part of communication, as is body language, of course.
Yes.
Something like 70% of communication is made up of body language. So how are we sitting? Are we leaning in? Are we keeping eye contact? All of those important things.
Yeah, only 7% is the words, isn't it?
Oh, it's mad. That's mad, isn't it?
Yeah.
That said, the words and language you choose are also really important. And aligning all of that with your organisational values. It's kind of a lot to think about.
It is a lot to think about. Leaders have got a tough job. There's a beautiful book, actually, Leadership is Language. Because you're right, the right choice of inclusive language I think is really important. But yes, leadership is hard. We know it's hard. It's also one of the most rewarding things that you can do.
Totally.
So spend a little bit of time being a great leader.
There we go. Easy.
It's that time where you ask one of us as inspirers a question about leadership, communication, performance, growth, anything that is of interest to you. And this week's question is...
So, Joe, communication keeps coming up on my engagement survey. Do you have any advice on how I can improve on this?
Communication comes up a lot on engagement surveys. And I think primarily because however many people you've got in the organisation, each of them is experiencing the organisation from their own perspective. So I think there's something to do there around really understanding your people, understanding what they want to be communicated about, how, what are their preferences about communication, and then really trying to build a bit more of a plan. Now, it doesn't need to be complicated, but it does need to be consistent. So I think there's some critical things that you can do. Hear and listen to what your people would like to know and how they'd like to know it. Create a consistent plan. So get a rhythm, like the beating heart of an organisation almost, and continually repeat the message but using those different channels of communication that exist within your organisation. Now, it might be by listening to what your people say, you'll find that 2 or 3 of those channels are most prevalent. Use those 2 or 3 channels. If you think that you've communicated enough, you won't have communicated enough. And it will often feel like we spend an extraordinary amount of time communicating, but the reality is you just can't communicate enough. It takes someone 7 times, as we discussed in a podcast recently. Takes someone 7 times before they really hear what you've got to say. So I think there's lots of opportunity. Use the people in the structure of the organisation. So, you'll have heard about a cascade. Really get your managers together and help and impress on them how important it is to communicate well with their teams. We experience the organisation through the lens of our manager. So often they are part of the solution, and helping them to receive information and communicate that in a way that's meaningful for their teams is a really good step to take. Keep it simple, keep it clear, and keep it consistent.
I love that. If I just add to that end piece, actually, because we have worked with organisations that it isn't more communication that people want, it's actually less. And I don't know if it's less. I think it comes to Joe's point about keeping it clear, consistent, and as simple as possible. And removing the complexity from the communication so that actually people truly understand. It's not always we want more comms. It's we want less comms.
We want the right comms.
The right comms.
Yeah. I love that piece around listen to your employees in the same way that you'd listen to your customers and follow those same kind of marketing processes.
Absolutely.
You won't go far wrong, right?
No, absolutely.
That's great. Thanks so much for your question. Always great to hear from you. If you've got a question and you'd like to ask us, then please get in touch by sending us an email on hello@startinspiring.com. We can't wait to hear from you. Another great podcast. I love talking about communication. And I think for me, the 3 most important things are about leaders being human. Bring more of yourself to your communication, because that's what creates connections with other people in the organisation. Listening and hearing about how people's preferences, so how do they want to be communicated to, and adapting your styles to what they need. And I suppose the thing to take away, I think, is probably every organisation does have this challenge.
Yeah.
So actually use your network, reach out to others. Where are people doing this really well that you could learn from?
Yeah, lovely.
Yours?
I would probably just add one to that, which is the elephant and rider piece, and really engaging the hearts and the minds of your organisation if you want to create movement or momentum. So I think those together are the critical components.
Yeah, it's great. Great conversation.